morning, everyone. I'm Candace Perry, Nonprofit Excellence Program Officer for Wellborn Baptist Foundation. And on behalf of Wellborn, I welcome you to today's session. We are thankful and excited that you have joined us. The vision of the Wellborn Baptist Foundation is to cultivate communities that flourish with the well-being, abundance, and peace that God desires. As an outflow of that vision, the Foundation, in partnership with Talent 2025, is hosting Collective Impact 101. We recognize the value of a cross-sector approach that goes beyond collaboration, and we see collective impact as a way to advance our community's most important initiatives. In order to address the complex issues in our community with timeliness and equity, it requires people and organizations from all sectors working collectively. Currently, Talent 2025 is one of those important initiatives, and Collective Impact provides a backdrop and context for introducing this approach. To share more about Talent 2025, I am honored to introduce you to the Talent 2025 Executive Director, Jeff Whiteside, who will provide us with an overview. Jeff?
Thanks, Candace. It's really good to be with all of you this morning. And welcome. I appreciate you getting an early start with us. What I want to accomplish here in the next 3 or 4 minutes is to wrap some context around what we're doing today. Talent 2025 is an initiative that has been in the works for 15 to 18 months, but you've probably not heard of us. And so, Duncan, if you could advance us a couple of slides. This is being driven by the Evansville Regional Business Committee, and you can see on your screen, it's an organization of large and engaged businesses in the region, in Gibson County and Warwick County and Posey and so forth. And they've been instrumental in driving, primarily behind the scenes, several key initiatives. And they're really focused on quality of place. And you'll hear more about that as we move on. And let's go to the next slide, please. You can see that the selection of businesses that are engaged, their locations, and their representatives. So we've got the right business gravitas behind this initiative. And it's called Talent 2025 because the ERBC is committed to 5 years to try to push this process forward, being led and guided by data. And so these individuals are helping steer this process in a very active way. Next slide, please. As the ERBC looked at the region, you know, they would acknowledge quickly that there are many good things that are taking place, but we've got to be in a position to compete in the future. And so you can see the vision of Talent 2025 is to be the talent and economic region of choice. Maybe just an interesting fact, as of Tuesday this week, there were over 11,000 job openings in our region. I mean, how are we going to fill those? And they'll be different in the future. And so you can see the objective is to align the resources so we can drive the capacity of that talent pool to drive economic growth and increase the quality of life in the greater Evansville region. So let's move on to the next slide, please. Maybe just a snapshot on the overview. About 15 to 18 months ago, there were about 40 community stakeholders that came together, and they devoted about a year in discussions about what it would mean to have, you know, enough talent and be the economic region of choice. And so it's going to take coordination and continuity in a region to drive and optimize the impact that needs to take place over the next several years. Let's jump to the next slide and you'll get a sense of how we're going to measure this initiative. There are about 32 socioeconomic factors that are being tracked by Chimera Economics and Analytics out on the West Coast. And this is the scorecard that we're trying to drive. And you can see these are pretty ambitious goals. They are pre-COVID goals. And so we're not real sure what that means yet, but it could drive us to adjust these, or it may not. We're in the data gathering process as we speak. But in the upper right-hand corner, you'll see a decrease in poverty. And that's one of the work streams, poverty reduction. And that work stream will launch a collective here in 45 days or so. You'll see in the lower left corner, increase in educational attainment. That group, that work stream will also launch a collective impact initiative to move that forward. And so, as I said before, it's going to take a number of folks to be able to do that. There are strategies and tactics aligned below these. And so the question is then, how do you implement? And you can see that model that has just come up on the slide, where we have those 5 primary work streams at the bottom. And you'll read through those and you'll clearly see educational attainment and poverty reductions. These are really complex issues to deal with, which is exactly why collective impact is the key tool to help us move these forward. So we'll have a key tool, and we have one of the international firm helping lead us today. The Tamarack Institute works in this space and has done so for a number of years. And here to lead us today in this discussion is Sylvia Chu, and I will turn the Zoom conference over to you, Sylvia.
Thanks so much, Jeff. Good morning, everybody. Lovely to see all your faces on my computer screen. This is hopefully, I know that you would have received an email today that has a PDF of the slide deck right in front of you. So feel free to make notes. And if you want to follow up or have any outstanding questions after, my contact info is there precisely for that reason. I'd love to hear from you. I'm just going to see, here we go. For those of you who know very little or nothing about Tamarack, Tamarack Institute is a national charity. We're based in Canada. The focus of our work is exclusively on making the work of community change easier and more effective for practitioners and change makers. We have a database and network of 31,000 learners that draw from across North America, also from Australia, from the UK, from New Zealand, and countries around the world. We know from our own work through Vibrant Communities, these are some action learning labs, we like to think of them as, that Tamarack also is home to. Our Cities Reducing Poverty is now a network of more than 300 communities that, like you, are drawing people from across multiple sectors to think and work together on innovative strategies to reduce poverty in their own communities. And their hard work gets amplified when they have the benefit of learning and sharing from one another. And that also helps them to work together in an aligned way to advance not just programmatic solutions, but also policy change solutions as well. And we'll talk about that in the session this morning. But as you'll see from the graphic above, we at Tamarack know that the work of community change actually requires, in our experience, 5 interconnected practices that change makers braid together. Collective impact, which is the focus of today's presentation, is one of those 5 fundamental practices, alongside others. So before I dive in, I'm sure you're curious, who all are the other 130 people who are joining us this morning? So with that, I'd like to ask you to participate in a bit of a brief poll. Who are you? So go ahead and choose, this is an anonymous poll, but go ahead and choose any and all of the responses that reflect you. Look at you go. Just going to give it a couple of more seconds as we're watching to see if we can crank our percentage up to 100%. We're getting close. Wow. Can you show us the results, Duncan? There we go. Well, obviously, the overwhelming majority of you are from the Greater Evansville region, but look at the range of different perspectives that we have. And that is something that, for me, is a really good and exciting thing to see. Okay, now I'm going to invite you to do a second poll with me before diving in. And that is, I'm going to go to the next slide now. I'm curious, what is your personal level of knowledge with collective impact and or your experience? Because this really helps then me to know and others to know what exists for people, what your experience is. Okay. All right. Take a look. So the majority of you are folks that know a little bit about the theory of collective impact or very little. And a few of you, thankfully, have some experience in actually working and implementing this framework. So that's really good to know. Thanks for chiming in with us on that. All right, so let's dive in. We at Tamarack, when we think of the 5 practices that we have identified, see collective impact, which as the most powerful of these 5 practices, because what it does is it provides a framework. If you think of those areas on the dashboard that Jeff shared, if you think of those as the focus and the purpose of Talent 2025, then really what collective impact offers, particularly as we think about educational attainment and poverty reduction, a possible approach for how you might organize yourselves to advance progress on those goals and that agenda. For those of you who are just learning about collective impact, the concept probably had been around for quite some time, but it really kind of emerged as a disciplined practice with the publishing of a paper in the Stanford Social Innovation Review in 2011 by 2 fellows, John Kania and Mark Kramer from the consulting group FSG. And they published a paper called Collective Impact. When that happened, what was critical and the gift that they gave was a common language and framework for a different way of working that they were also able to identify as being responsible for creating profound events or significant impact on a range of different tough, tenacious issues. And what I find fascinating, if you look, FSG stands for Foundation Strategy Group. So they as a consultancy had a strong network of practice with philanthropy networks. And how they came to discover this framework, collective impact, came as a result of a consulting assignment they were given by a philanthropy network who somewhat sheepishly called them in and admitted that though they had been meeting and working together as philanthropists in their region for quite some time, the one question that vexed them that they could never give a compelling answer to is, for all the work and all the investment that they had been making individually and collectively, what difference were they making? And because they knew they weren't objective, they called in the folks at FSG and asked if they would conduct a research assignment, do interviews with grantees and come back and really help that philanthropy network wrestle with that question and answer it for themselves. So off they go. And the FSG folks do their research and they come back to present their findings to the philanthropy network. And they say 2 things. Wow, so the good news is 80% of the time, the investments that you have made as philanthropists, individually and collectively, have made a positive difference in the lives of the human beings in your community. Good for you. Here's the bad news. The vast majority of that positive impact has been quite limited to a select number of individuals who've been fortunate enough to participate in programs and services that you help to fund. And in fact, for the majority of cases, that's where that impact ended. However, they said, don't lose hope, because the other interesting finding we want to present to you is that as we were doing this work, we started to see a very small subset of initiatives that initially we kind of set off to one side as outliers. They seem to be working in a different way, and they seem to, unlike the vast majority of these initiatives that we reviewed, seem to have been able to catalyze a positive change process that went far beyond a limited number of program participants to actually be a catalyst for a much broader, sustainable change process. And what was equally interesting to them was that these high impact outlier projects weren't necessarily all nested in a particular sector or not all focused on a particular issue, but they were quite diverse. So on the one hand, they had a very small focused project in a neighborhood in Boston, a low-income neighborhood, that had actually shown to have a positive long-term effect reducing obesity rates in children and ultimately in their families as well. In another case, they looked at the restoration of the environmental quality of a river system that spanned multiple counties and crossed state lines. So these high-impact projects weren't necessarily limited to a particular issue or a particular scale or scope. And in fact, what you see today, and what I'm going to walk you through as the 3 preconditions and 5 conditions of collective impact, are in fact the common patterns and themes that the folks at FSG uncovered as the common ways that these outlier high impact projects had been working that were distinct and different from the majority. And as noted here in the definition, what collective impact has come to mean today is that this is a disciplined cross-sector approach that has been proven to have the capacity to solve complex social and/or environmental issues on a large scale. And in fact, in 2018, there were so many practitioners of this approach that they actually undertook and commissioned a field-wide evaluation of collective impact as a way of working and demonstrated with confirmation that this is true. If you take these 3 preconditions and these 5 conditions and you intentionally think and act according to this framework, the likelihood of you generating high impact lasting results is proven. So let's talk about the 3 preconditions. Now remember, these 3 preconditions and 5 conditions, these are those common patterns and themes noted in the outlier project. And as you think about this, I want you to think about the overview of Talent 2025 that Jeff gave us, and in particular, thinking about educational attainment and poverty reduction. Have we mobilized influential champions to really help galvanize and pull people together on an aligned effort to address longstanding issues and concerns? And are these influential champions drawn from a diversity of sectors, bringing a diversity of perspectives and different networks of influence? Second, what would our assessment be of the urgency of the issue that's being focused on? So in the case of educational attainment, for example, if you were to stop 10 people on the street in this community, how would they rate the significance and importance of this as a shared goal? And I think, it's not about putting a rosy spin on it. It's really about the people championing the effort to look at the eye and say, look, just because it's our passion doesn't mean that it's everybody's passion. And so maybe, depending on where our community or our region is at, We need to do some groundwork to really build interest, build curiosity before we dive in and start moving. But that's an assessment that you have to make. And the third of the preconditions is, have you secured adequate resources to really help advance this work? You know, the truth of the matter is this absolutely does mean resources as in dollars, but way beyond the dollars. Adequate resources also means in-kind contributions. Adequate resources means enough trust between and amongst a diversity of people that we can actually share honestly our worries, our concerns, and the realities of what's happening in this, around this issue in our community, both the great, the things that are strengths that we need to build on, but also frank acknowledgement of the challenges as well. The next, I'm having trouble with this slide. Duncan, would you mind? There we go, thank you. So here are the 5 conditions. Again, remember, we got 3 preconditions, 5 conditions. These are the common approaches, elements of a successful kind of outlier approach. The common agenda is the first one. And like a shared vision, the common agenda really seeks to create an aspirational goal that a diversity within your community can rally behind and agree with and be willing and excited to support. But beyond just this aspiration, the common agenda has 2 other elements that are critically important. One is a common statement from a diversity of partners from various sectors that you collectively believe that we will never achieve this vision unless we work together. And secondly, it is beyond the aspirational vision, a high-level roadmap from this diverse network of leaders that talks about this is the action plan, roughly, that we think we need to embrace together if we are going to move from where we are today to this aspiration. It is not uncommon in the creating of an aspiration and a common agenda for collective impact that it's iterative. You have a rough, good sense, and then you need to take it out and give yourselves collectively permission to continue to refine it, to build consensus and energy, frankly, to actually grow the network of people who are championing it alongside you. Shared measurement is the second of the 5. Now, it for me is one of the ways in which collective impact as an approach distinguishes itself from many other typical collaborations that most of you have probably been part of. Shared measurement has 2 dimensions to it. First and foremost, it's a reminder that in developing a common agenda, we have to root in the reality of what data is telling us about this issue in our community. So we are not just cherry picking things, we are actually looking and framing our approach guided by an understanding of data around the issue. Perfect example of this is the Hamilton Roundtable on Poverty Reduction. So they started themselves, they got themselves formed, their leadership team decided they would host community dialogues in their city to talk to a variety of perspectives about the issue of poverty in their city. And not surprisingly, were bitterly disappointed when very few people showed up to the conversation. But in fact, if you put yourselves in the shoes of an ordinary person, giving up an evening to come and talk about something as depressing as poverty was really disconcerting and probably contributed to the low turnout. Not to be discouraged, that leadership team then went back to its table and took another look at the data that they had about how poverty showed up in their community, and were stunned to realize that 75% of the children in their community were growing up in poverty. So they then launched a second call for community dialogues. This time, their focus was on what's it going to take to get our community to be the best place to raise a child. And why did they choose that? Because the data told them 75% of the kids in the city are living in poverty. If we're focused on children, there's a very good chance we are going to make a significant impact on the experience of poverty for families and children in our community. And that's exactly what happened. So Shared measurement is powerful because it helps you to frame and set priorities for action. But as the work starts to unfold, shared measurement is also the metric by which you, as a diversity of sectors, are tracking your collective progress over time. And this enables you then to decide what of your experiments that you're trying to implement together are working well and which ones we may need to continue to tweak. It's an ongoing evolution of your learning. Mutually reinforcing activities is the third of these 5 conditions. And what it really speaks to, again, is underscoring one of the unique characteristics of collective impact, which is this need for multiple sectors working together on the same issue. And so what it involves is not creating collective impact as a net new organization, but rather creating a conversation space where the organizations and community members who come to be part of this work have an opportunity to map out together the fullness and richness of resources that already exist in your community to address the issue, and then really look at how can we better align and tweak them so that they are working in a mutually supportive way, first of all, but then secondly, where are the gaps? Right? Where are there areas where none of us are working, and yet from what we're learning, this might be a critical element in the journey of success around addressing the issue. Continuous communication is the fourth of the 5 conditions, and what it actually speaks to, it has sort of 3 levels to it. The first is acknowledging the critical importance of shared language. When I think about different sectors, one of the things that always strikes me is each sector has its own lingo and its own way of thinking and talking about the work that you're trying to accomplish. And so really what's beautiful is you need to acknowledge and give time for these different sectors to realize that when you say one thing and I say the same thing, are we actually talking about the same issue? And I joked yesterday with folks, I did this own work. I have done this own work in my own rural community, about an hour and a half northwest of Toronto. Our focus as a region was working with a collective impact framework to enhance overall community well-being. One of the areas and priorities we chose to focus on had to do with building up our local food economy because we're historically an agricultural region. I'm organizing the first ever food summit with a bunch of other community partners. We've got 140 people coming. We're 3 weeks away. I'm trying to recruit a contact I have from a volunteer network I'm part of. And I'm all excited because he is the VP of strategy for one of our country's biggest food producers. And I'm thinking if I can get Tom to this food summit in our little region, that will be a coup. And we start chatting and I'm trying to convince him to come. And he says, you know, Sylvia, this is fascinating to me because we at Maple Leaf Foods just went through a strategic refresh and have identified local food as one of our 5 strategic priorities. He can't see it, but I'm actually dancing inside. I'm so happy, right? And then he keeps talking and my heart sinks because I realize I've been thinking about local food as 100 kilometers geographically based on where I live, right? Anywhere within a 100-kilometer boundary. Tom's definition of local food is anywhere in Canada, right? So there you go. Here we are, 2 Canadians, born and raised, both with English as a first language. He says local food, I say local food. We mean 2 totally different things. So one of the key early areas of focus under continuous communication is, can we create a common language that makes sense to all the players, regardless of the sector we've come from? Second, if I am the ambassador to a collective impact initiative on behalf of my organization, wow, good for me, I'm learning a ton, what a great experience for me. How am I being supported and how am I being encouraged to think about not just what I'm learning, but how I communicate what I'm learning back to my respective organization, so that it isn't just me who's being brought along on this learning journey with my other sector colleagues, but it's my entire organization that is learning alongside me. And then the third layer of continuous communication is remembering that always we are doing this work in service of our overall community. And so how are we both informing and engaging the citizens of our community and also sharing both the progress and the learnings that we are gleaning as we do this work together? And finally, the fifth condition is backbone support. If you go back to the very first papers that John Kenya and Mark Kramer wrote about collective impact, you'll see that they started by referring to this as a backbone organization. Boy, oh boy, am I ever pleased that this language has evolved to now be backbone support or backbone infrastructure. I'll tell you why. One of the most common mistakes I've seen in groups using this framework is the temptation, unintentionally often, that the collective impact effort suddenly starts to look an awful lot like any other organization in the community. And I would argue that's by default because the organizational structure is what most of us are familiar with around how we organize to get stuff done. But frankly, collective impact shouldn't be about creating a net new organization, but rather the best definition I heard is your collective impact effort is the co-created innovation space that your community leaders have convened to enable your existing organizations and services to work together differently and to innovate together to be better at achieving the results that we know that we can't, any one of us, achieve alone. You want your collective impact effort, therefore, to be designed in such a way that it's way more agile, way more nimble. It has to have enough of, guardrails to give people a sense of trust and to facilitate your collective work from moving forward productively. But you don't want to hem it in with too much bureaucracy, too many rules too soon. You've got that in your organizations. That's not what this is about. This is permission to actually go above and beyond what the work of our individual and respective organizations to do. Quite frankly, we can't tell the people who rely on the work that we do day to day that we're going to stop delivering these programs and services we currently deliver. They need them. They're valued. And at the same time, we know we need to do more. So collective impact is the frame that you co-create with others to enable you to explore the what else, what if, what more, while your organizations continue to deliver the quality programs and services that you know that they're going to need while you're figuring out the new future. Does that make sense? Okay, let's go on to the next slide. So again, we've talked about, yes, collective impact is a form of collaboration, but not all collaboration equals collective impact, right? This is one of those funny stories about shared language. I say collaboration, you say collaboration. Are we really talking about the same thing? I love this framework because what it does is it unpacks. There are 8 possible interpretations about varying levels of collaboration that may exist between 2 groups or multiple groups. The red box you see on the far right of your screen is the area where collective impact resides in that whole spectrum of collaboration. So you really need to assess, is this the level of collaboration that I as an individual or we as an organization want to be part of? And it's a deeper commitment and a more longer-term commitment than a one-off information sharing between and amongst organizations. And the level of trust required and that grows over time as part of one of these long-term collective impact efforts actually deepens trust and relies very heavily on building strong relationships of trust between and across people who haven't historically had an opportunity to work together. If we can go to the next slide. One of the best questions that I've ever heard is, well, if collective impact is so great, shouldn't we be doing collective impact for everything? And my answer is no. Just because you have a hammer doesn't mean every problem is a nail. In fact, so if you're asking yourself, how do you know whether collective impact is the right framework for you, this actually might help. Brenda Zimmerman, well-known academic doing lots of work in health management, but with a real lens on appreciating complexity. One of the gifts that she has given to the sector as a whole is to say, typically not all problems are the same. And she said there's really about 3 distinct types of problem that show up. And we're so action-oriented, we tend to dive in and try solving problems. But she said, I would encourage folks, before you do that, step back and ask yourselves, what kind of a problem are we trying to solve? And the reason why that's important is because the type of problem you are facing influences the tools and approaches you ought to be using in trying to solve it. I think there's a couple of more headers that pop up, Duncan, on this slide. So there are 3 types of problems Brenda identified for us. The first, on the far left, simple problems. Simple problems are known problems. We know what the problem is, and we actually know how to fix it. Brenda's example is about making soup. So if you and I, Amy, are invited to the same potluck, and we are given the same recipe for chocolate cake, and we both happen to follow it to the letter and bring it to the potluck, odds are you're not going to be able, no one's going to be able to sit down and say, Sylvia made that cake or Amy made this cake. It should all be the same. Hand washing to to slow down the spread of disease is another perfect example of a simple problem. So we know it'll work. The solution works no matter where we are, whether we're in Evansville or whether we're in Alaska. It will work. It's just about compliance. The second type of problem Brenda identified, she labeled as complicated. So this is a problem that's knowable. It's going to take a little bit of work, but we can sit down and figure it out. And Brenda's example is sending a rocket to the moon. Lots of little pieces, and we need to build out those, the formula, and we need to kind of experiment to get the different components working well together. But once they do, this problem, this solution should work for as long as we need it to. Perfect example that I like, because I find the notion of building a rocket a bit foreign, is putting on a play. We know every play we set to put on, we need a great cast, we need a great script, we need a good director, we need great sets and staging, we need good lights and sound, we need props and costumes, and we need marketing. Each play we set out to do as a drama team, we need to sit down and figure out how each one of those component pieces is going to work for that play. Then we need to practice putting the different pieces together, and eventually we're going to get it right, and our play can run as well and as long as we need it to. That's a knowable, complicated problem. The third type of problem, Brenda called unknowable. A complex problem, she suggests, is fundamentally different than a simple or complicated problem, and that's because the elements of the problem are not static. And her example, which I do think is brilliant, is raising a child. Any of you who have been a parent, particularly if you've had the experience of parenting more than one child, know firsthand your parenting strategies that work for child A won't necessarily work for child B. And then even if you figured out child A and child B, if you add a third child to the mix, suddenly that person has a very different and dynamic sets of needs. And so you need to forever be adapting, shifting, and changing your strategies and approaches reflecting that individual child and or how their needs are evolving and changing as they grow. And you can go ahead and buy parenting books, which God knows can be a godsend, but again, you need to take the advice in each one of those books and adapt it and shift it and change it to the reality that is your life and your family. Collective impact is a framework and approach that works well when the issue that you're dealing with is complex, dynamic. The issue is continually evolving and shifting and changing, and you need to be able to adapt your strategy and your solutions to reflect that kind of situation. Okay, on to the next slide if we could. The key thing here is when you are dealing with a complex issue, no one sector working by itself will ever be able to fully address this. And we've all had experiences of this, where one sector begins to develop its solution to the problem, and often it can unintentionally make it more complicated for other sectors, or sectors unintentionally work against each other or at cross purposes as they try to solve the same issue. So what we know and why collective impact as a framework works really well in these types of situations is you design the best solutions when you bring those diverse perspectives all around the same table to spend some time building a shared, richer understanding of the issue before you leap into solving it. And that's why we at Tamarack, in our experience, have found that yes, you absolutely need to have content experts at your table. These are the people with knowledge and experience and expertise on the issue we're trying to fix. But equally important, we need to make sure we have strong context expert voices and perspectives at that same table. So what is a context expert? In my mind, a context expert is the person with lived experience of your issue in the Evansville region. You know, you can look and be totally inspired by a poverty reduction solution that comes out of Hamilton, Ontario. It might give you some really good ideas and possibilities around how you could move and create a shared agenda to address poverty in the Evansville region. But frankly, it's not going to be something that you can just use like a cookie cutter and implement. You have different leaders. You have a different history of how the issue of poverty has evolved. You have different levers as well. And so really it's about taking the inspiration from others who have walked this path, but then having the wisdom at your own table to know how to adapt and adjust that proven strategy to suit the dynamics and reality of your own community. Okay, on to the next slide, please. So let me just sum this up by saying collective impact is not about a single organization or a single sector. It's not only focused on building programmatic solutions, and it is a long-term, not a short-term focused initiative that puts its emphasis on addressing complex problems, and the intention is to create that shared innovation space for different sectors and players to work together on the issue, not to create a net new organization. All right. So one thing to hear about it as a theory, to really make this helpful and understanding, I'd love to share with you a very specific example that comes to us from Erie, Pennsylvania. And what I love about this story is that Erie Together is an initiative that was created in Erie, Pennsylvania when shortly after the economic downturn in 2008, 2009, when the then mayor of Erie woke up to the sad news that his community had the highest level of poverty anywhere in the state of Pennsylvania. And frankly, that was not what he wanted to be known for on his watch. So he got together with the then warden of the region, and they did a series of conversations and dialogues with people across Erie. They also went and, much like you, met and talked to promising poverty reduction initiatives across other jurisdictions to learn. And what I love about Erie Together is that when they went public, they really kind of zeroed in from all the conversations and dialogues that their focus was going to be on three things. They were going to focus on making sure that more of the children in their community grew up to be successful adults. The work pillar for their focus of work was really about saying, how can we make sure that more residents of Erie have access to family-sustaining employment and income? And then lastly, acknowledging that there were some people who were in dire straits, that there really needed to be an immediate response to ensure that more residents had their basic needs met, because that was almost a precursor before you could tackle the other two. But what I loved, when they went public, they described Erie Together to the community, not by what it was, but they talked about it by what it wasn't. Not a social service agency, not a social service program, but rather a county-wide civic movement. Isn't that beautiful? Because embedded in that is a message to your community that this isn't a hot potato we're going to hand off to the social services sector, or it isn't a hot potato we're handing to county government. This is a civic movement where every single organization and individual who cares about this can make a contribution, and that is needed. Love it. So then they created a series of action teams that were countywide, much like you've done with Talent 2025, and they gave each one of those action teams a key area of focus. So each one of those tables brought together a range of experts, and their challenge and task was to come back to the overarching leadership table with the action plan that they recommended for how they were going to achieve their goal, okay? So let's all pretend we've been assigned to the Early Childhood Readiness and Success Action Team. Well, very quickly, though we come from different sectors, we kind of align and agree that these steps are really good milestones that would help us to measure that a young person was on a positive trajectory, okay? There was a little bit of debate, should we have, you know, born at a healthy birth weight may have preceded this, but generally there was broad agreement across this rich network at the table that this was right. So if we're all agreed on the end goal and the key milestones along the way, the question then becomes, so how do we get there? What do we act on? What are we going to do? So this, sadly, is where the rich debate begins, right? So you'll see one of the group folks came to the table, said, listen, I'm looking at the data. Our region has the highest teen pregnancy rate anywhere in the state. And we all know very clearly how critical high school completion is. And I will tell you that parents who, that the teens that become parents in high school often don't complete high school. We really should focus our energy and attention solving that problem. Well, wait a minute. Someone else says, listen, the literature in academia and education is really clear. If we are wanting to ensure that more of our young people are educated and informed and ready for careers of the future, then we really need to be emphasizing a curriculum on science, technology, engineering, and math, because that's where the future is. And so, and we really need to do some catch-up work in our community around that. So there's, you know, there's legitimacy to that. Someone else says, but wait, we have a very high incidence of criminal justice involvement with our young people. And the data and literature is completely clear that if we don't get a handle on that, then their trajectory goes bad very, very quickly, and it's a significant subset of our young people's population. This should be where we focus our energy and attention. Do you see the challenge here? Every single one of these possibilities is legitimate and right. So you're trying to choose between a right and a right, and that's part of the tension that happens, right? Because any one of these pathways can take you to the right place. The question becomes, what do you choose? Now, interestingly, in Erie, ultimately they landed on third grade reading. Do you know how they got there? On the third round of meetings across their group, trying to zero in on what they wanted to focus on as their primary strategy, someone came in utterly incensed. They had recently been to a conference where they learned that a corporate prison sector uses third grade reading rates as the best predictor for how many prison spaces they needed to have ready 10 years into the future. So the number of young kids that weren't reading at grade level by grade 3, that was a pretty good guesstimation of the number of prison spots they would need. People were incensed and angry, and all of a sudden the debate was, you know what, we got to go here first. And everybody rallied around. The learning and the lesson, I think, for you all is there will be these opportunities where any one of the pathways could be a good pathway, but if you diffuse your energy too broadly, you're not going to get enough impact. What's powerful is to also watch where people's energy and passion is, right? The moment energy and passion came in and people got behind it, that's the gut check you need to tell you this is a great area to focus on, okay? But here's the other beauty of it. When you pick and narrow and are strategic, then you have the power of really zeroing in and going deep on understanding the elements and the competing factors and the contributing elements that are giving weight to this issue. So the working group here started with baseline data, and in 2013, they saw 33% of Erie's third graders were reading below basic, 33 were at basic, and 34 were above. Then they went deep, and they had a multitude of connected strategies. So they did a lot around understanding curriculum and making sure that there were lots of professional development opportunities across the multiple boards and schools. They, remember, it was when they're thinking about it as a county-wide movement, they mobilized their faith networks to start after-school reading, like grandparent buddy programs, to make sure that young people not only were reading but had support to read. They mobilized the libraries, they mobilized the business, everybody. They thought very broadly about how could they get different groups to help contribute to this overarching goal. And the power of data, you can see very clearly at the end of 3 years, look what they had done. They had shifted the number of third graders in their community who were reading below basic from 33% to 6. Those at basic from 33 to just 19, and fully 75% of their third graders after 3 years were now reading at or above grade level. Isn't that phenomenal? So lots of really great lessons here, right? Yes, you have to hold the rich, broad picture of the contributing factors that need to be considered and could possibly be opportunities and areas for action. But ultimately, at the end of the day, weighing right against right, you're going to have to pick a handful. And when you do, that enables you to go deep. When they were able to show to the community the difference that collectively their work had made because of the data that and the shared measurement that they were committed to, do you know what a huge inspiration this was for the community as a whole in terms of picking off the next thing and getting busy, right? So that's the paradox you're dancing with this work for sure. So let me now just walk you through. Collective impact is an invitation to work differently than we typically do. And there are some essential mindset shifts that those who've done successful collective impact can tell you are absolutely essential. One is you need to think about how do you move beyond just getting your community to buy in to what you're doing, to really helping them co-own their role and responsibility to address this issue alongside you. And think about the contributions that they can make to that effort. How do you design it in such a way that people feel invited, included, and actually called to contribute? Next slide, please. As we've said earlier, we need not just our content experts, but we also need our context experts together at the same table, thinking and working on this issue. Next, please. This one to me is probably one of the most pivotal. Yes, high quality programs and services do need to be part of the consideration of your collective impact work, but more important than that, you need to invite the partners around the table to not just think about programs, but what are the system changes that need to happen to create the kind of conditions for folks to really thrive. If we can go to the next slide, my friend Karen Pittman from the Forum for Youth Investment, I think, describes it best. A program intervention would help an individual or a family beat the odds, but a systemic intervention seeks to change the odds and the reality for everyone. Historically, I would say most of us are really great at the programmatic stuff, less good at the systemic stuff, in part because it's hard for us to see, because we're in it. That's why the diversity of perspectives is so critical. Our friends at FSG have done some groundwork around this, and they know firsthand that there are four core pathways around systems change. You begin by increasing coordination, so you enable the folks in the system to see and understand and align their work better together. You identify gaps that are critical, and you work in partnership with others to prototype new solutions. Then you look for how we can advance and expand proven practices to have greater impact. And then lastly, you look at what is your shared policy agenda? What changes need to happen at an organizational, municipal, state, or federal level to help support the work you're trying to do? Next slide. So we know it's best to think in terms of 3 to 5 years, and there's lots of resources and wisdom to guide you through key elements and what kind of leadership is needed to advance your work over time. Lastly, Collective impact is really requires that twofold focus. The framework itself really focuses on how you work and how you organize yourselves to work differently, while at the same time you need to be equally focused on the issue at hand. If it is about reducing poverty or increasing educational attainment, what are we going to put our attention toward, and how are we going to track our progress over time? Know that if you're embracing this isn't a short-term quick fix. This is a commitment to work together over multiple years to make a big difference on a tough and tenacious issue. And it's about designing as though you're creating that shared innovation space that allows you to bring and test new solutions for greater impact. So I will close by saying, in my experience, collective impact, our friends at FSG, John Kenya, Mark Kramer, gave the sectors a huge gift and gave communities a huge gift by cleanly articulating such a powerful framework and building shared language around it. But that won't help you avoid the messy and critical work of determining how to apply this framework to address whether it's reducing poverty, increasing educational attainment, or making yourselves the region of choice, right? You still have to translate this theory into practice and action on the ground in your region. Okay, thank you. If we can go to the next slide. What I would love to do, if it's all right, invite you to share any comments or questions now about this framework in your chat box. But I would like to move us now, I think, into small groups and give you an opportunity to have a conversation with a handful of others to really think about this and share back some insights. So if we can go to the next slide. So by all means, keep chiming your questions in. But very shortly, what we're going to do is move you into a small group of 7 to 8 other colleagues. Take no more than a minute and introduce yourselves to one another. And then what I would like you to do is I would like you to ask one person to be the note taker on your group's behalf. And overall, just make sure that you as a group have a chance to hear from everyone. And I want you to think about what would you imagine as the potential challenges and the potential opportunities of using this collective impact framework to advance the poverty reduction and or educational attainment goals of Talent 2025. So what do you see as the challenges and the opportunities? And then we're going to give you a 2-minute warning at the end of your 15 minutes that you'll have to discuss this together. And that's your chance as a group then to reflect on all the different challenges you've identified and pick the one that you think is most compelling to share out to everybody. And similarly, do the same with your opportunities. Look at all the different opportunities and highlight the one that you think is the most significant to bring back and report to the whole. Okay, any questions on that process? All right, so then thank you for playing along. Please go into your working groups. You'll have 15 minutes. You're thinking about what are some potential challenges or potential opportunities of working in this way around achieving the Talent 2025 goals.
Thanks, Sylvia. I'm just going to send out invitations to the breakout rooms now. You'll just have to manually click accept and you'll be sent automatically. As Sylvia said, you'll have 15 minutes and I'll give you a 5 and a 2-minute warning. Good luck, everyone.
Well, welcome back, everyone. I had the privilege and honor of being part of group number 11, and I hope all of you had opportunities for as rich and informative a conversation. I am going to type into the chat box, and I would invite the same of the other group note takers to highlight what are the challenges that your group identified and also what are the opportunities that you identified in your group discussion. And if we could, can we open up the lines to everyone, Duncan? And just, I would invite a couple of you. We have a few minutes. If you want to just share the top highlight, the top challenge and or the top opportunity that came up in your conversation, just verbally so we can hear from some of the groups. Who'd like to kick us off?
My name's Tyler Stock. I'm with group number 12. And one of the main challenges we thought about is, how can we intentionally, kind of break our task-oriented thought process? Because we all know we need collective impact and we need to come together. But, we all kind of function within silos, and how can we continue to break out of that task-oriented process to really come together and collaborate, and make the change that we need to see. And then
Beautiful. Did you have an opportunity that you guys flagged in your conversation? I'm sure you probably did. But
I think as an opportunity, we see the ability to be intentional about bringing together, services and organizations that are providing similar services. And instead of, just jumping and trying to solve a problem right away, being intentional about, saying, hey, how can we engage all the stakeholders, all the constituents in our community to bring everyone together for a long-term benefit and a positive impact. So just, bringing everyone to the table, we thought is really important and really a great opportunity within Collective Impact.
right. Thank you very much. Can we hear from one other group reporter? I thank you to those of you who are already typing in the chat box. That's really helpful.
Hi, everybody. This is Tom Stallings. I'm representing Group 9. Our group, I did identify a couple of challenges, and we feel that the most significant challenge, first off, there are a lot of groups in the Evansville area that are already working on trying to improve a great many of the things that we're talking about tracking as metrics here. So really the challenge is going to be getting all of those folks on the same page, everybody pulling together, which of course is exactly what this program is about, obviously. But getting everybody speaking the same language, getting everybody recognizing the same common goals, and getting everybody to get into more of a big picture mode will obviously be a challenge. But one of the things that came out of our discussion was an opportunity. We felt that there was an opportunity to build on the momentum of existing programs, such as the E is for Everyone marketing campaign, to try to build more of a community consensus for this project for Talent 2025. We think there's some track already laid that could be beneficial in moving this process forward.
Tom, thanks so much on behalf of your group. Again, group scribes, myself included, I haven't yet done this. Put into the chat box, if you wouldn't mind, the challenges and opportunities that came up in your dialogue. Our commitment to you is, of course, we will synthesize this data and be able to share it back to you, so you'll get it back. And I think just seeing the diversity of perspectives will be really an important first step. And now I'd like to turn it back to you, Jeff, if you wouldn't mind, to maybe bring us home and wrap us up.
All right, will do. You know what, when I looked at the second survey question, I was just blown away by the diversity that was represented there. And it just makes me really excited. I reflect a little bit, and I enjoyed Sylvia's commentary about the level of complexity in problem solving, and to the extent of my abilities in making soup from recipe is opening a can, and sometimes I'm not always successful about that. But before you jump off this call, please just give me 3 minutes. At the bottom of your screen, there's a reaction button. Go there if you would, please. And would you please press the applause emoji showing your appreciation for the work and insight and wisdom that Sylvia and her team provided today. And thanks to Duncan, he's the man behind this curtain that makes all this possible. We appreciate that. Now, if you'll give a thumbs up of appreciation to the Wellborn Baptist Foundation, Candace and her entire supporting cast made this series of events possible, and they have invested a great deal of time and resources to help move our community forward. And so let's advance to the last slide. It's a slide you're familiar with. I mentioned we'll launch 2 collectives in the next 45 days. We have a strong framework built, and the development of the corresponding backbone organizations is already underway. And I know you're asking the question, how can I be a part of these collectives? What a timely question. A survey will hit your email box likely in the next hour or so, and that will give you an opportunity to indicate your interest going forward. I personally believe that we are at a critical crossroads. Our challenges are significant, as I said early, that it will take more than a village, it will take a region. If it was easy, it would have already been done. If you would like to get involved in something bigger than yourself, well, this is the opportunity. Whether you're a content expert or a context expert, your contribution is not only needed, it's actually required. We can't keep doing the same thing that we've always done and expect different outcomes. I mean, kind of the classic definition of insanity. Again, you'll have the chance in an hour or so to contemplate your engagement, and I would invite you to help us reimagine what our community could look like going forward. I know that your time is your most valuable commodity you have. Thanks for spending it with us today, and thank you in advance for investing it in the community. This concludes our virtual conference on Collective Impact 101. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, Jeff. And before you go, in your chat box, I would love it if you could share with us one word or one phrase that sort of wraps up and summarizes what you're taking away from the time we spent together this morning. Thanks, everyone.